People always ask, why did Moses take 40 years for a 4-day journey? On the surface, the question sounds almost absurd. From Egypt to Canaan, the distance is not vast, a journey that could have been covered in less than a week. Even walking slowly, with children, livestock and baggage, scholars say the Israelites could have reached the Promised Land in a matter of days. So why did it stretch into decades? Why did a whole generation rise and fall, wandering through barren landscapes, while the land of milk and honey stood just over the horizon? This mystery is not about miles, it is about faith. Imagine it. Picture yourself standing among the camp of Israel, newly delivered from Egypt. You can still taste freedom in your mouth. Raw, fresh, unbelievable. The salt of the Red Sea is still in the air, the echo of crashing waters still ringing in your ears as you remember Pharaoh's army swallowed by the tide. The sky above you still carries the memory of plagues, hail, darkness, locusts. You have seen Egypt, the world's greatest empire, humiliated before your God. And now, ahead of you lies Canaan, the land God promised to Abraham centuries ago. The land your parents and grandparents spoke of in hushed tones while groaning under slavery. At last it is within reach. But instead of marching straight in, you find yourself circling, turning back, wandering. One day blends into another. A week becomes a year becomes 10, then 20, then 30. You bury your father, then your mother, then your neighbors, your friends. And somewhere along the way you begin to realize you will not live to see the Promised Land. Why would God do this? According to Numbers 14:22-23, the Lord himself declared, "Not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors." Did you catch that? It wasn't Pharaoh that stopped them. It wasn't distance. It wasn't the desert's heat, scorpions or sandstorms. The real obstacle was not out there. It was in here, in the heart. The problem was unbelief. Think carefully. These were not people who lacked evidence. They had seen God move with their own eyes. They had tasted freedom with their own lips. They had watched the world's superpower collapse in one night under the hand of Yahweh. And yet, when they came to the threshold of destiny, when spies brought back reports of giants and fortified cities, they lost courage. Numbers 13:31 tells us, they said, "We can't attack those people, they are stronger than we are." And in that moment, all the miracles of Egypt, all the wonders of Sinai, all the manna that fell like dew, it all seemed to vanish from memory. They believed in giants more than God. So the Lord pronounced judgment. This generation will not enter my rest. Now, pause for a moment. Why 40 years? Why not a shorter punishment? Why not a longer exile? Why did God choose this exact span? In Scripture, numbers are never accidental. 40 is the number of testing, refining, and transformation. Over and over again, the Bible uses 40 as the measure of a season of preparation. It rained 40 days and nights in the flood of Noah, Genesis 7:12. Moses fasted 40 days on Sinai to receive the law, Exodus 34:28. Elijah walked 40 days to Mount Horeb, 1 Kings 19:8. And our Lord Jesus fasted 40 days in the wilderness, Matthew 4:2. 40 is not an accident. 40 is a furnace, a crucible, a God-ordained time in which what is false burns away and what is true is forged in fire. So Israel's 40 years were not merely punishment, they were a season of reshaping. But here is the sobering reality. The wilderness was also a graveyard. Every man and woman who doubted at Kadesh Barnea, who cried out, "We cannot," in the face of giants, eventually fell in the desert sand, Hebrews 3:19. So we see that they were not able to enter because of their unbelief. Picture it. With every passing year, funerals filled the wilderness. The sand became heavy with the weight of broken promises. Every burial mound was a sermon in the desert, whispering, "Unbelief forfeits destiny." Disobedience can turn a week-long journey into a lifetime of wandering. But here is the hidden truth people often miss. Even in judgment, God's mercy did not depart. Think of it. Their shoes never wore out, Deuteronomy 29:5. Their clothes remained whole. Manna fell every morning. Quail came when they hungered for meat. Water gushed from rocks in a dry and thirsty land. A pillar of cloud shaded them by day, and a pillar of fire guided them by night. The very presence of God never left them, even while disciplining them. Isn't that astonishing? They were punished, yet provided for. Rebuked, yet not rejected. Disciplined, yet still his people. Because God's delays are not God's denials. The 40 years were not meant only to bury the old generation, they were also meant to train a new one. Children grew up in the wilderness who had never known Egypt's chains. Sons and daughters learned to rise with manna on the ground, to march under God's cloud, to live in covenant community around the tabernacle. The desert that killed their parents raised them. So by the time Israel stood again at the edge of the Jordan, something had changed. They were no longer a mob of runaway slaves. They were a nation, disciplined, humbled, dependent, ready. The promised land was never about rushing in. It was about being prepared to inherit what God was ready to give. And that is why the 40 years mattered. So now we stand with Israel. 40 years later, the graves of the old generation mark the desert behind. A new generation rises, staring across the Jordan River. The land still waits, but they themselves are not the same. Here lies the mystery most people overlook. The 40 years were never wasted, they were invested. Let's slow down and look closer. When Israel first came out of Egypt, they were a people set free, but not yet a people prepared. You can take a slave out of slavery in one night, but it takes much longer to take slavery out of the slave. They left Egypt physically, but Egypt was still inside their hearts. They longed for the leeks, the onions, the meat pots of Pharaoh. Numbers 11:5. They grumbled, saying, "Why did we ever leave Egypt?" Exodus 16:3. Can you hear the tragedy in that? God had split the sea to deliver them, and yet they still romanticized their chains. That is why the wilderness was necessary. Not to delay them, but to deliver them on a deeper level. Think about it. If God had brought them into Canaan immediately, what would have happened? They would have faced giants and fortresses with the heart of slaves. They would have tried to conquer the land with Egyptian thinking, Egyptian fears, Egyptian idols. The result would have been disaster. They needed time, not just to walk, but to be transformed. In the wilderness, they learned God's law. At Sinai, they received the 10 Commandments, the covenant that would define them as God's holy people. In the wilderness, they built the tabernacle, a dwelling place for the presence of God in their midst. They learned how to worship, how to sacrifice, how to live in holiness before a holy God. They learned how to march as an army, tribe by tribe, under the leadership of Yahweh. The wilderness was not an accident. It was a classroom. Now pause here. Doesn't that sound familiar? How often in our own lives do we cry out, "Lord, why am I still here? Why am I going in circles? Why am I stuck in this desert?" when the promise looks so close? Could it be that what looks like delay is really preparation? Could it be that what feels like wandering is actually training? Because here is the truth. God is more interested in shaping your character than in speeding up your journey. This is why Jesus himself was driven into the wilderness for 40 days before his ministry began. It wasn't wasted time, it was proving time. He faced hunger, loneliness, and temptation, and overcame. And in that victory he stepped into his calling with power. The Son of God himself did not bypass the wilderness. How much more must we walk through ours? But let's return to Israel. There is another hidden reason the journey stretched 40 years. Judgment and mercy intertwined. God had sworn that the generation who refused to trust him at Kadesh would not enter the land. That entire generation had to pass away. And how long does it take for a generation to die? Roughly 40 years. The very length of a human lifetime became the measure of Israel's exile. But even here, mercy whispers. God did not wipe them out in one blow. He let them live out their days under his care, sustained by daily bread from heaven. Every morning manna fell like grace, reminding them, "You are under discipline, but you are not abandoned." And then the moment came. Moses stood on Mount Nebo, gazing at the land he himself would not enter. His eyes took in the hills and valleys of Canaan, and then he passed, leaving the mantle to Joshua. The desert had ended. A new leader, a new generation, a new chapter. The Jordan parted as the Red Sea once did, and Israel finally stepped into promise. But notice the difference. This time, when spies went out, their report was not fear, but faith. Joshua 2:24 records them saying, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." The wilderness had done its work. The children of slaves had become the children of promise. So why did God let Israel wander for 40 years? The answer is layered. It was judgment for unbelief. It was the death of one generation and the birth of another. It was the cleansing of Egypt from their hearts. It was the classroom where they learned to depend on daily manna, daily mercy, daily presence. It was preparation for promise, and the lesson still echoes today. Maybe you feel stuck in your own wilderness. Maybe what should have been a short path has become a long, weary road. Maybe you ask yourself, why is God delaying me? Why is he letting me circle the same mountain again and again? The story of Israel whispers back, delay is not denial. The wilderness is not wasted. God uses deserts to kill what must die in us. Pride, fear, unbelief, and to raise up what must live, faith, obedience, humility. He lets us hunger, so that we may learn that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word from his mouth. He lets us thirst, so that we may discover the rock that gives living water. He lets us wander, so that when we finally enter our promise, we do not mistake his gift for our own strength. And here is the final mystery. 40 years of wandering ends with one day of crossing. A lifetime of circles ends with one step of faith. That is how God works. He prepares long, but delivers suddenly. He disciplines for years, but redeems in a moment. So the question is not, why so long? The real question is, will you trust him in the meantime? Because the promised land is not for the impatient, it is for the faithful. So hear the call. Don't waste your wilderness. Don't despise the delay. Learn the lessons. Let Egypt die within you. Feed on daily manna. Follow the cloud and the fire. Because one day the Jordan will part and the promise will open before you. And when it does, you will see. The wilderness was not your prison, it was your preparation.